Thank you very much indeed, and welcome to a special panel debate that I'm delighted to be able to host. It is all about the impact of travel and tourism on wildlife, in particular on endangered species. And we've got two fantastic guests to chew this over with. We've got John Scanlon, who's the Secretary General, the boss of CITES, which is the international organization committed to doing the work to try as best as possible protect the world's most endangered species, both animals and plant life as well. And we're also joined by Brett Tollman, who is the boss, the CEO of the Travel Corporation, done an awful lot of work on these very issues as well. So gentlemen, welcome to you both. Thanks for joining me. I suppose the most basic question of all right now is whether you believe travel and tourism is a positive or a negative, seen from the prism of the world's most endangered species, access to them, and the fact that, frankly, they are still dwindling in their numbers. Start with you, John.
Well, Stephen, I would see it most definitely as a positive. We are facing a surge in illegal trade in wildlife. Endangered species are down to critically low numbers. We have to look at ways and means to ensure their survival, and well-managed, responsible wildlife-based tourism that provides benefits for local communities is an increasingly important part of the mix for ensuring the survival of our wildlife.
But one of the dangers I can see with that is that you turn what remains of some of these key species, and let's be specific, let's talk about the African elephant or tigers or rhinos. The danger is that by insisting that as many people as possible get to see them and have access to them, you turn them into nothing more than survivors in theme parks.
That's a true risk. I mean, we've got 7.2 billion people. It'll be 9 billion. We're running out of space. Large animals like rhinos, elephants, lions, they need space to roam. Now, we need to have an incentive, a positive economic incentive to enable that space to remain where wildlife can go. Now, wildlife-based tourism provides that opportunity. It provides an economic model which, if done properly, can be good for people, good for national economies, and good for wildlife. Again, it's a question of management. And that's where people like Brett Tollman, who's here today, are in the front line of that discussion. How do you do it properly? I am in no doubt we have to have wildlife-based tourism if wildlife is going to survive. And we must have the industry working with us on the front line.
Well, that's the most elegant of cues to bring in, Brett Tollman. How do you do it properly? Give me examples where it is being done properly, but maybe more significantly, give me examples of where, even today, and with all of the dangers of extinction that we know about from the work of John and others, even today it's being done badly.
So if you take Africa, for example, tourism is a huge benefit. It's not tourists that are killing these animals, and they have nothing to do with, obviously, the trade in that, when you take rhino and elephant in particular. And in our case...
Except, if I may, except tourists who come with guns, the hunters.
Sorry, absolutely. And that's really not the tourism either we're involved in or that we condone at all.
But it is still happening.
Absolutely, and it's deplorable, it's disgusting, and it must stop. I think that's ridiculous, especially where you see it done in closed areas where the animals cannot escape. It's just revolting.
But the reason it's happening, and this is a wider point, the reason it's happening is because those guys, the hunters who come with ambitions for bagging their own lion or whatever, right, they are paying the biggest bucks. And in the end, this is all about economics. You know, the communities that you're working with, they want revenues. And if tourists with guns come offering them mega revenues, it's hard to say no.
Couldn't agree more. Obviously, the backlash with Cecil, for example, in Zimbabwe was an example of how most of the world sees it. But if you take the tourism that's related to photographic safaris, for example, which is certainly the largest number of people moving, we're very involved with the communities that support that. And if you take the country of Botswana, who've banned all trophy hunting and have put the army behind the enforcement of that, I think that's a wonderful example of how it should be done right. My birth country, South Africa, does it wrong in many cases. So there's good and bad, like everything. Animal rights, certainly we and many other companies in tourism have supported getting away from that, respecting the elephants, whether it's in India or Africa. We no longer allow any riding of elephants or engagement other than just admiring them and being supportive of it.
But obviously your message is that tourism can be made to work in a symbiotic, positive way with protecting wildlife.
Absolutely.
But are there any cases at all that you can think of, either of you, but we'll start with Brett, where actually the best way to conserve what remains of a species is to keep tourists out? Is that ever the right solution?
I don't believe so. And I don't just speak personally, being in the business. Wilderness safaris that we're involved in Africa, for example, we work with the government of Botswana to relocate rhino on a regular basis from South Africa to Botswana. We use their planes and we use our funds, which come from the profits of bringing tourists there, to move rhino out of endangered areas into protected areas like Botswana. So a perfect example of where that is a force for good.
What about, John, I'm just talking off the top of my head, but what about the very, very rare white tigers? Am I right in saying that there are just a few hundred left? And is it right to offer tourists the chance to go up into the mountains and try and see and track those creatures which are on the point of extinction?
Look, we have to be pragmatic. Our ultimate objective is the survival of wildlife. What is going to get us there? Recognising it's a very crowded planet, there are competing land uses. How are we going to make wildlife a competing land use? Now, you could say some countries are rich enough just to put it aside, but that's going to be the exception rather than the rule. There are good examples of where you manage it well. You can't have a flood of 10,000 people going chasing a snow leopard up a mountain. It'll be disastrous for the mountain, the snow leopard, and the local people. How do you manage it in a way where it's going to be good for the snow leopard, good for local people, good for national economies? That's the challenge. It is being done properly in a number of cases, but we cannot move away from wildlife-based tourism as being a critical part of the mix. The planet's too crowded, there's too many competing land uses, we have to be pragmatic here.
Let's talk poaching before we finish, because it is such an important part of the endangered species story. Is your message that somehow travel and tourism can help in the battle against poachers? Because it seems to me the fundamental problem there is that there are too many corrupt governments around the world which turn a blind eye to the poaching, and I'm struggling to see how travel and tourism is going to change that.
Travel and tourism is critical in our view for stopping the poaching and the smuggling, because quite often you have an instance where a local tourist arrangement doesn't involve local communities. They have no vested interest in the wildlife. Why are they going to go out of their way to protect wildlife that brings them no benefit? Wildlife-based tourism that involves the local communities, the sort of stuff Brett's been doing, the sort of stuff I've seen in the Northern Rangelands Trust in Kenya, engages local communities, employs local communities. This is going to be the best way to save the wildlife. They work to save the wildlife because that's their development path. They get security, they get education, they get health through conservation. So that's where we need to go. And what I see is very positive.
The trouble is the mismatch of potential benefits, though. In the long run, I can totally see your point. It's sustainable, long-term development based on the presence of these animals. But in the short term, the rewards of aiding and abetting the hunting and poaching of these animals are exponentially greater. That's the problem.
So what we have to do, we have to work in the range state and right across to the consumer state. We have to deal with the demand and deal with the supply. In the range state, yeah, there's high profit to be made by poachers, but you're in a poverty spiral there. You exhaust your resource in quick time. The resource doesn't go to the wider community. And where you have a competing land use, like we've seen in Northern Rangelands Trust or some of the winners today, they can win. They can beat the poacher. So I'm optimistic, but you have to engage the locals, you have to do it properly, and then we'll win.
Brett, final word to you. You work, with people on the front line who are faced with this dilemma. Poaching is an illegal form of revenue, and then they've got the long-term investment in tourism. Do you believe people are going to make the right choices?
Some will, some won't. But again, with travel and tourism, using our profits, we support another organization like Wilderness Foundation and provide them with a plane that they use to help spotting of poachers, and then we get the rangers involved to go and catch them.
All right. Well, Brett Tollman, John Scanlon, thank you both for joining me. That's pretty much it
Stephen.
from me. Sandra, I'm going to hand back to you.